Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Jai Hind. On behalf of Team CASA, I, Major General Dipender Singh, Director CASA, welcome you all to this all-important CASA webinar, our 37th so far, on managing perceptions, India's global influence, G20 and beyond. Now, for the past decade, especially in the last few years, India has been slowly climbing up the international hierarchy, increasing its global influence en route to emerging as one of the world's great powers. Along with China's rise over the last 4 decades, India's own remarkable rise further reflects the current global shift of economic power from Europe and North America to Asia. India's celebration of its G20 presidency can be seen as a demonstration of its emerging soft power as it showcases the country's growing influence and reputation on the global stage. The G20 presidential year is expected to help India in its image enhancement exercise, find new partners, and reinforce relations. Despite being ascendant, India, however, often seems to be suffering from a perceptual gulf, whereby the country's future potential frequently appears at odds with its current reality. Although India ranks highly on many of the key factors that are pivotal to the realization of a great power role, the wider conception of India's international stature seems to be seen in some quarters as exaggerated. Why is that so? Is India managing perceptions properly? To discuss this, we have with us a very eminent panel and a very distinguished and renowned moderator, all of whom are members of CASA. Allow me to introduce them. Our first speaker, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh, is an Indian civil servant and has recently retired as the Indian ambassador to Germany. Currently, he is Honorary Professor of International Relations Studies at IIT Indore. Ambassador Singh finished his schooling at Mayo College, Ajmer, and obtained his bachelor's degree in politics at the St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. He is a postgraduate in international studies from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is a 1980 batch officer of the Indian Foreign Service. He started his career in diplomacy with a posting in Japan and has since been posted in Sri Lanka, Kenya, and Italy. During his tenure as an IFS officer, he has been ambassador of India to Germany, Indonesia, ASEAN, Timor-Leste, Ethiopia, and the Republic of Djibouti. He has been representative of India to the African Union, UNECA, and IGAD. He is also Deputy Permanent Representative of India in UNEP and UN Habitat. We welcome Mr. Gurjeet and request him to share his views with us. Our next panelist is Colonel A.K. Sharma, who is the editor-in-chief of the prestigious journal South Asia Defense and Strategic Review. Now, Colonel A.K. Sharma, a former Indian cavalry officer, has commanded 74 Armored Regiment and participated in several military operations in India. He has held many prestigious command, instructional, and staff appointments during his career. After seeking early release in 2007, he started a bi-monthly journal, South Asia Defense and Strategic Review, one of the fastest growing publications in the subcontinent. The magazine deals with geostrategy, military affairs, and military technology. Foreign policy and internal security issues, particularly within the region, are covered extensively. As the editor of the magazine, he writes regularly on matters relating to defense and security, policy, and processes related to modernizing defense and police forces. He has edited and published a number of books on security and military subjects. He is an expert on capability development and acquisition process and is invited to deliver lectures on the subject at a number of forums in India and abroad. Welcome, Colonel Sharma. We look forward to hearing your take on this interesting subject. Our final speaker is Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, IFS. He has served in the Indian missions in Cote d'Ivoire, Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, Nigeria, Libya, and Jordan. In the Ministry of External Affairs, he has worked in the Economic, West Asia and North Africa, and Consular divisions. He also served as Director General, Joint Secretary for the Gulf and Hajj divisions in the Military of External Affairs. Thereafter, Mr. Trigunayat worked as Deputy Chief of Mission in the rank of Ambassador in the Embassy of India in Moscow. Prior to his superannuation in May 2016, he served as Ambassador of India to Jordan and Libya and High Commissioner to Malta, June 2012 to May 2016. The ambassador has studied Russian history, culture, and language at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. We welcome Mr. Trigunayat and look forward to hearing his views. Our moderator is Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain, PVSM, UISM, SM, AVSM, SM, VSM, and BAR, who needs no introduction as he is one of our foremost voices on defense and strategic affairs. His last assignment in service was as the military secretary. Prior to that, he commanded the 15 Corps and has held a number of prestigious command, staff, and instructional appointments, as well as served in the UN mission abroad. In 2018, General Hasnain was appointed Chancellor of the Central University of Jammu and Kashmir. On 21st February 2020, he was appointed member of the NDMA in the status of Secretary to the Government of India. In that appointment, he is currently also a member of the Empowered Committee for Information and Communication set up by the PMO. As you are all aware, he also finds time to write commentaries on geopolitics and speak extensively too. I now hand over to General Hasnain to conduct the rest of the proceedings.
Thank you very much. Thank you, General Dipenda. It was very kind of you. Welcome, my fellow panelists. What a pleasure, what an honor to be with you sharing the dais. And my compliments and greetings to all our viewers. Jai Hind to everyone. Why this strange subject? We've already crossed 6 minutes, so I don't want to labor too much on this, but I must just give out the basic rationale. I take your mind back to 2020, when the pandemic was raging, and the month of April, May, we came to know about the transgressions on the line of actual control that the Chinese had made. No intention of capturing territory. 50,000 troops had been brought in after they were training in the depth areas of Ladakh, beyond Ladakh, in Tibet. Their intention seemed only to do a little bit of coercion, wolf warfare diplomacy, convey a message, and essentially convey to the world actually that India is not up to it. It's not a power to reckon with in the manner in which China is, and the way China is progressing. Why did it come to this? Primarily because over a period of about 7-8 years before it, a series of things had happened in India. Economically, we were doing well. On the economic side, we were doing well. Our government was stable. Lots of internal security issues had been resolved, or to an extent, we had got the better of them. We were being projected internationally in a much better light. And this was worrying people. One of the biggest things, of course, was Jammu and Kashmir. On the 5th of August, we had also taken a very, very strong decision to dilute the Article 370. And this was conveyed to the world that here was a decisive government, a decisive India, an India of the future. And it was a rising power, already a middle power, and then becoming slowly what I call, and many times not accepted easily in the lexicon of diplomacy, I call it a swing power. It was becoming a swing power. A swing power in the sense there were people wanting to align with India. They wanted India on their side to tilt the balance in international power games. So that is what India had achieved. The pandemic set us back by minus 24% to our economy, minus 7% the next year, and we bounced back with a 6.5% growth in the third year. And since then, things have only been looking up. Political stability, the economy not doing badly at all, probably the fastest growing economy in the world. stable relationships internationally, proven general neutrality, uh, and being sought its assistance, friendship, etc., being sought once again all over by the international community. In the process, it seems that once again that perception has emerged that India's story is a geopolitical success which is happening. There may be aberrations here and there, but it is a success story in the making. Is this exaggerated, or is there truth in this? Are we correct when we say that we are looking to be a $5 trillion, a $10 trillion economy by 2035 or by 2030, and things of that nature? Or is this all a lot of hype? Is this all something that we want to believe? We are floating a perception for people to believe more for political reasons than anything else. So I couldn't think of a better panel than the panel that we've got with us here to answer these questions. This is not a generic, this is not a focused China-centric, Pakistan-centric, or the United States-centric webinar where all of us are exchanging ideas on those issues. It is across the board, across the world. You have to know your geopolitics across the world. You have to know India's stability, India's internal security. You have to know it very well. And here is a set of people who know that extremely well. So as a guideline, I've got a few questions which I've pushed out to them. I will just broadly tell you these so that you will know that these are the lines on which some of these arguments are going to be established. For example, I've already told you, are we going to be a $5 trillion, $10 billion economy in the intended time frame, or is this also exaggerated? Are we jumping the gun in assuming that the apparent success in the economic domain also will translate into the strategic and geopolitical domain? Because that could be a fallacy. You could be a very powerful economic power, but have nothing to do with in terms of a geopolitical power. Is it too early to assume a greater Indian strategic role in various international challenges, the Indo-Pacific, or what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in the Eurasian area? On the flip side, an early realization of India's potential role as a nation above the status of a middle power. This could pay dividend and ensure we do not let the moment and the opportunity pass. Is that the correct way of looking at it? Is the Indian political leadership ready to accept a higher strategic responsibility, imbibe better strategic understanding, and most importantly, promote a better strategic culture in India? And is India's rise likely to be hotly contested? Like I said, 2020, it seems to me that seemed to be having the truth. Which powers would focus on the prevention of India's rise, and how would this impact us? India may be the emerging shining light in the strategic world, yet its record in the regional environment has been none too successful. How is it this likely to impact its rise? Remember, SARC is virtually non-existent today at the moment. We are giving that much more importance to the SCO as a platform, as a multilateral platform here. So with these questions in mind, and with this backdrop, my request, our first panelist, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh, to please make his intervention. And I'm being very liberal. We've got till 5:30, and maybe a little more. We could probably stretch it a little more, but I would give you 13, 14, 15 minutes, whatever is your choice. Thank you, sir.
General, happy to be here. So let's dig into this quickly. Perceptions are an integral part of international relations. Whether you follow liberal, realist, or conservative outlook, the role of perception is important. Some schools believe that perceptions determine what could happen if countries looked at you differently. For instance, can Pakistan look at you differently? Realists believe that it is the attributes of power which determine international relations. Like we are clear that Pakistan looks us in a way that we can't deal with it. The alternative is that perceptions of such power and its exercise often make a difference. Pakistan believes they can start a war, but not win it, but not let us win it either. This is where the concept of soft power emerges. The purposes of both hard and soft power are the ability to shape the perception and action of others. Hard power may be more coercive, but soft power tends to attract people to your sense of values, culture, and the ability to perform. People believe that perceptions of power can be more important than power itself. I remember the Girilal Jain, the then editor of the Times of India, telling me when I joined the service that it is better to have a mailed fist visible than punch somebody with it, which means that countries with a lower level of traditional sources of power, in terms of what Morgenthau describes, may actually have greater influence in the world than perceived. India, in the initial non-aligned movement, perhaps was an example of this. How many battalions has the Pope? Napoleon famously asked when told that the Pope had immense influence. Therefore, image making or perception management are part of foreign policy, which aims to exercise power and balance it by seeking to influence both the action and minds of contemporaries. The extent to which this is done determines the essential nature of a society, whether it is democratic like India or autocratic like China or in between. Perception management, therefore, is a key determinant of policy. International relations are structured on the basis of commonality of goals. The SCO, do we have commonality of goals? Quad, do we have commonality of goals everywhere? A mutual assessment of the power of each player and the status that each player assigns to the other. Thus, a picture is created about a country which, if persistently emphasized, can generate lasting images among decision makers, the public analysts, and the private sector. The impact of these could be different, and therefore different elements within a state react with nuanced differences to such images and use them to generate reaction and impress decision makers to their concern. That is how interest groups generate different perceptions within states. Undoubtedly, geostrategic location, affiliation of the state concerned to one group or the other, as in the Cold War, key history and culture contribute to this, but are not the sole determinants of perceptions. For instance, everybody knows that the Ramayana and Mahabharata link India and Southeast Asia, but do they contribute to determinants of power anymore? The openness with which a country receives foreign engagement or controls it certainly influence this perception. Developments in demographic dividends, new technologies, economic performance, and sporting progress give each country a perception. Remember Y2K and remember how few medals we win in the Olympics. These are then used towards achieving perceptions, and through them, you can try and achieve your goals better. Now, coming to General Hasnain's question, is the Indian economic story myth or reality? Again, this depends on your perception. Increasingly, the perception is coming to the conclusion that the Indian economy is more resilient and will grow between 6 and 7%. 60% of the Indian GDP comes from consumption, and this is because of the large middle class. This is among the main drivers of GDP, with infrastructure expenditure being another big factor. India's youth factor, people between 15 and 29, provide about 34% of consumption. If they are properly skilled and provided employment, they can motor the economy faster. What is missing in the economy is a higher degree of job creation, inadequate domestic investment, FDI in mergers, acquisitions, and digital assets which are booming. But with rising population, there is rising inequality. And these mark the perception of India's success story. It depends which side of this coin you market. I used to always say when I was ambassador that everything I say about India is true, but the exact opposite could very well be true. That is the contradiction of India. Most FDI which comes to India looks at the success of the economy, the growth of the middle class and its consumption patterns, and fast legal solutions to problems. If you see Tim Cook, who represents Apple and was in India last week, you see his statements. They point to this, the growth of middle class consumption, success of the economy. He believes that he can do great business in India, but is he going to produce more in India? The doing business with India index is important. India is wanting on several international indices which measure elements of performance. We normally tend to challenge the basis of those indices. I believe that is inadequate. You may not agree with the basis of traditional indices, but then you should have your own index on specific issues which are of interest to people and companies who can motor your economy along. For instance, the number of Indian universities which are highly ranked in the world is still small. The skill development is considered inadequate. The education system is considered broken. The health status, the role of women, climate change indices, and ease of doing business are all important. These are what create a modern sense of perception and power. We must create our own way of persuading others that our measurements are better. In this regard, the annual Indian Economic Survey has therefore acquired a stature which is quite well regarded. Now, I find that the best perceptions are built by successful businessmen who succeed in your country. They go back and tell people, oh, this country works. But if you see the number of countries today who are riled with China strategically, it does not marry with the number of business associations in the same countries who are less wary of China and remain enamored of it. Therefore, if you can cultivate business communities, you probably have much longer range perceptions and partnerships. Now, what about India's role in the world today? India seeks reform multilateralism, but we built up a strong relationship with many countries, Japan, Europe, ASEAN, Africa. However, the pandemic and then the Ukraine crisis challenged many of the bases on which these relationships were built. India was promised the fruits of globalization when it moved closer towards Europe. It reformed its economy on trade and climate change. Over the last decade, it moved center stage rather than be an outlier and became a perception changer. But protectionist tendencies, the manner in which the WTO works, the deglobalization of the pandemic taught you that at the worst of times, your best friends also don't stand by you. The challenge is to get the international milieu to respond to you or be strong enough to challenge it. The Atmanirbharta is a good idea, but it is not a Turkey. It is becoming the core resilient supply chain and a new perception builder. Perhaps the manner in which it was worded and propagated alarmed people rather than attract them, but course correction has been undertaken. Finally, 3 points. From the time of the Ukraine invasion to a year later, from criticism to grudging acceptance and muted appreciation has been the way that most countries are viewing India's position. The number of countries now exercising strategic autonomy and following the Indian model, but not necessarily the Indian position, has increased manifold. This puts India in an important position. It is your ability to manage perceptions and reality to secure your best friend interest out of it, which is now our challenge. Under the G-20 presidency, India has revived its engagement with the global South.
May I please request the people in the audience to kindly mute your microphones, please. It's very disturbing for the speaker otherwise. Please do that.
India as the voice of the global South is the perception which is now well accepted because India has over a period strong relationship with Africa, ASEAN, Central Asia, Latin America, Caribbean, and the Pacific. The trilateral cooperation with G7 countries carry out now with India in Africa is the biggest tribute to India's consistent Africa policy, which challenges China. It is an error to think that all perceptions are judged only on how India is seen vis-a-vis China. In our neighborhood, yes, but outside, not entirely. This is largely an academic pursuit. In real terms, countries view what India can do differently from what China can do. When I was ambassador to the African Union, I was clearly told that China indeed does more, but what India does is better. It is because we followed models which are more conducive to developing African countries and their people rather than tapping only into their resources. The same goes with ASEAN. It has taken much time, but now today we are carrying out the ASEAN-India maritime exercise, which they have only done with big powers like US, Russia, and China so far. So there is an acceptance of what India can do. Finally, a perception of power is also how judiciously the military performs. Indian Navy so far has performed well in the oceans, dealing with non-traditional threats, particularly providing HADR. This is very well recognized and gives a positive perception. To conclude, is it a similar perception which comes out from the manner in which we have held our borders? I leave this question to my next panelist, Colonel Sharma. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Master Gurji. Thank you so much for that very, should I say, you've done a broad sweep of the entire country. You do not have to necessarily focus on any specific area. This is exactly what was required of you, and you've given you brought in some issues which were not covered anywhere in the concept note. I would say the takeaway from me, the aspect of gray zone. We are going to be subjected to gray zone by a lot of nations, and China among them being the main one. Our ability to get our facts right and put them across is going to be something which will make a huge difference. Our strategic community, for example, we don't have much of a strategic community. We can reach out, speak, etc. Washington Post and New York Times, we are subjected to their perceptions and what is put out across the world on what India is and what the India story is all about. Ashley Tellis has just written on the lack of confidence that the United States should have on India as a partner, right? I mean, these are the kind of perceptions which are going around at the moment. But thank you for putting this in perspective extremely well. I'll now request our second panelist, Colonel Ashwini Sharma, and particularly I request you, Colonel Ashwini, to dwell on the aspect of the borders, internal security also to an extent. How stable are our borders going to be? Is war inevitable? And should we be preparing so hard for it at the cost of all the development, all the other factors which go into making a nation great? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, General Hasnain, and thank you, CASA, for this opportunity. General Hasnain, to your specific question about should we be preparing for war, or should we be going to war, or should we avoid conflict at this point in time when there are more urgent priorities that face us, I think I'm going to come to that a little later. Before that, I just want to talk a little more about why we are chairing G20 today. There's why India has the heft that is being given to it and our relevance in the global affairs. My mind goes back to 2004 when, as you talk of HADR, there was this tsunami in the Andaman Sea, and India was one of the first countries. Within 12 hours, we had helicopters over Sri Lanka giving aid. We had naval ships heading towards Thailand and Banda Aceh. 2015, Nepal had a devastating earthquake. Once again, IAF led the Operation Maitri, as I remember, and our C-130 were the first ones to land in Kathmandu. We did the same in Turkey. And right now, as Sudan, the conflict raging in Sudan, IAF has again carried out certain daring rescue operations over there. Indian warships are there evacuating hundreds and thousands of Indian citizens, while just a contrast, I just got to know last evening only that the US embassy, on the other hand, just evacuated a couple of choppers, landed there and took away all the embassy staff. The citizens are still there. In our case, it was not just the Indians that we've taken back from Sudan. We also evacuated Sri Lankans and Nepalese and Bangladeshis. The approach is a little different. It is also indicative of the capability and the capacity that India enjoys today. And that's what gives us the relevance that we have. And G20 chairmanship, therefore, is not really a surprise. And we're also seeing the SEO being held in Goa right now, and where India is speaking with a fair amount of confidence. What gives us this confidence? Ambassador Gurjeet has already covered quite a few of those issues, but I think I'm just going to mention in passing where our strengths lie, what is it that pulls us back, some recent initiatives, and then I'm going to move on to the security scenario where, of course, China, as we all know, happens to be the biggest threat that faces us and what occupies our minds most of the times. So I think the biggest strength that India has is the largest democracy in the world. The nearest rival is US, and we are 4 times the size of US in terms of our democratic republicanism. Largest democracy also happily implies that we also have the largest demographic dividend. Europe and US, their windows are already behind them. China is also aging. India's window, on the other hand, has opened very recently. And I think our dividend is going to last us another 3 to 4 decades, which is a long time. So while the rest of the world ages, we will be brimming with useful energy. The other impact, parallel impact, is the Indian diaspora across the world. When I was a young boy, I was told if you land at Heathrow, all that you will be greeted with is the sight of a few Indians cleaning and sweeping the airport. That has undergone an absolute change, a total change. Today, the Indian diaspora is, we're one of the most prosperous ethnic demographics in the world, particularly when it comes to the US or UK. And the workforce that we provide today are engineers, doctors, professionals, and many of the MNC leaders, as we are all aware. A multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious society. There are issues, but I think the soft power that we generate out of this is massive. And again, we are a youthful nation. Personally, I hope and I'm very sure that our youth will be able to evolve a syncretic religion out of this, a syncretic thought process out of this. They will be able to filter out the best and leave the rest. Militarily, the largest army, 4th largest air force, 5th largest navy. So that says quite a lot as far as India's military power is concerned. Of course, in our neighborhood, we have threats for which we need a lot more. And to keep up with the aspirations for regional dominance and to be counted as a global power, I think we need to do much more when it comes to our military power. But we are strong enough to take care of our present threats and needs. Now, some of the points that I've just mentioned are also the ones that drag us down. Being the largest democracy, being the most populous nation is actually also what pulls us backwards. No matter how much progress we make, there are so many more mouths to feed. There are so many more people who are to be given jobs, etc. And that it's a constant drag unless we do something about it. Poverty. We've taken care of extreme poverty. We've almost eradicated that, but still there is about 25 to 30% in our country which is surviving on less than $3 a day. Subsistence farming, small land holdings, lots and lots of people into agriculture. I think about 30 to 35% of our population is involved in agriculture, whereas in developed countries, probably down to 1%. Energy dependence. Health remains a major area and a major cause of concern. Climate, we have our own climate and environmental challenges. The social divide is a problem. We got to take care of that. So while we have a lot of inherent strengths, there are also issues that drag us backwards. So when you do a complete audit and analysis of where India stands, well, lots of factors in our favor, but some that we need to urgently take care of. In the recent decades, or the last one decade, I think where we've done phenomenally well is our infrastructure revolution. Not just the physical infrastructure, but also the social and digital infrastructure. Majority of the audience today, and I suppose a very large number of CASA members, we by and large look at the defense expenditure and the budget related to defense. But really where the exponential increase has taken place in India is infrastructure. There's been a 30 to 35% increase from 2014 to 2023. And the results are there for everyone to see, whether it's ports, railways, airports, surface transports, etc. Digital India is amazing, extraordinary. I myself find it hard to believe when I'm traveling in India to see its reach. You know, I'm able to pay 10 rupees to a guy who was just selling me a banana by just putting down his phone number on my phone. UPI is just extraordinary. The usage of data, you see every youngster, you see every maidservant, you see every driver holding a smartphone in the hand and using data. It's so cheap. It's so efficient. Here in my house in Gurgaon, I have 1 Gbps. My son in Hong Kong gets only 100 Mbps. And, we really made long strides over there. Social infrastructure, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile. Jan Dhan is one scheme where I personally had a lot of doubts. How are you going to give zero balance accounts to millions and millions of Indians who don't even understand banking or can't even spell banking? But it has happened. Ayushman Bharat, Swachh Bharat, etc. So economically, like the ambassador said, we are already on a path of one of the fastest growing economies. 6.5% is a decent figure, even though a lot of it, he said, is on account of domestic consumption. Fair enough. But still, one of the largest despite COVID. And having said that, I think COVID did set us back as it did to the rest of the world. But I think India is one of the few countries which have come out of COVID stronger. Lastly, Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, Atmanirbhar Bharat, the government has control over defense, telecom to an extent, railways, and that is where Atmanirbharta actually starts and ends. I can tell you with confidence that this is going to do us good in the long run. Though let me do a fair warning, Atmanirbhar Bharat and the way we took off a little over-enthusiastically with negative lists, with no imports and this ban and that ban is going to hurt us in the near future, is going to hurt us in the midterm, but in the long run, definitely in defense, we will emerge much stronger, as in the other sectors where we are making strides in terms of 5G, 6G, and the infrastructure development. Now, when you there are many other factors, but I won't go into them. I just picked up the ones that I felt were important and deserve a mention. But all this has led to an attitudinal shift. I'm sure most of you agree that it's a resurgent India. You get that feeling, you feel the spirit, you feel a little more confident. You know that you are being counted, whether it's in the region or in global affairs. Indian passport today does matter. I'm not right. I'm not sure the right or wrong, but somebody said in Sudan, if you showed an Indian passport, they would deal with you with a little more respect than any other passport, because they know we are there, we mean business. Now, this attitude is definitely reflected in our foreign policy. The other two panelists being two former ambassadors and distinguished foreign service officers. I'm not going to speak much on it, but I'm sure they will agree with me that today India is far more assertive. And India is what India is telling the rest of the world is we stand for our interests, and rightly so. It only makes me very happy when I hear Mr. Imran Khan say, look at India and look at their policy towards Ukraine and Russia. Right or wrong, but we stood for our interests. We stood for what we think is right. Whether it's siding with Russia or Ukraine or taking no sides, we do what we feel is right. I was particularly pleased with the Prime Minister's statement when he said, this is not the time or the age for wars. Very emphatically said so, and a large number of world leaders flocked to that statement. And whether it is applicable to us now in our own region is a different matter altogether. But the point is that India is confident today, and India is able to convey it in as many words. And certainly when I say attitude, the country's leadership, it makes a huge difference. It's like commanding an army unit. The commanding officer makes 50% of the difference to a unit's performance. Similarly, in a country, you have a strong leader, you have an assertive leader, you have a confident leader, it shows. Coming to the security environment in the region, I don't want to say much about Pakistan because right now, Pakistan is facing a lot of their own issues. We've managed to finally dehyphenate India-Pakistan when it comes to security. It remains a threat. Pakistan, being China's close ally, definitely remains a threat, but it does not occupy our mind all the time. And our security paradigm doesn't really depend on what Pakistan says it does. China, of course, is the bigger threat today. And China is the bigger threat not only to us, really, it's a bigger threat in the region at a global scale. Indo-Pacific has come to occupy significance, of course. And within that, I think we are all aware of Quad. It came about in 2007. Then Australia pulled out, and it was, from 2009 to 2017 was a period when we continued with the military exercises, when we continued with the engagement, but there was no formal Quad. 2017 Act, something happened. As far as India is concerned, I think till then India was actually a little cautious about dealing with China on matters related to security or any kind of confrontation with that country. But then Doklam happened in 2017. I think that was a kind of a wake-up call for India. Similarly, you had Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Japan. He was, of course, being very persuasive, as he was in 2007. And Australia, the leadership changed hands, and then Quad came about yet again. At the same time, we also had President Xi in China. 2012 onwards, he's not been as laid back as his predecessor, Hu Jintao. He's aggressive, he's more nationalistic, and he is more imposing when it comes to affairs within the country or outside.
Could I request you to wind up, Ashwini, about 2 minutes now?
So,
2 minutes.
okay, sir. And of course, Indo-Pacific, the other relationship that has recently come about now is AUKUS. India is not a member, but of course we are affected by it. When it comes to the challenges, when it comes to heft in the international affairs, my personal take is that you need to have economic support, you need to have deep pockets, and the caliber of the gun does matter. So you need soft power, you need hard power. India is on its way to achieving both. The road ahead is a little long and bumpy, I must admit, but I think we are ready for the challenge. I'll end there, sir. We'll take on the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You took us on a very wide circuit on lots and lots of issues of particular interest. This aspect of Indian soft power, our demonstration of our capability through these operations like Maitri, the tsunami in 2004, Obdost recently, Operation Kaveri, which is going on. I don't know how many of you saw that officer, the artillery officer who was a DA in Riyadh, announcing that the Indian army has arrived. This is what shows the confidence, the ability to project that confidence of your nation across. The Indian diaspora you referred to, which is a huge ambassador of the country, giving out that idea to people. I still remember a colonel from Malawi in the United Nations speaking to me once and said, it must be great to belong to a country where everyone is rich. So I said, who gave you the idea that everyone in India is rich? He says, no, but every Indian in Malawi is rich. So if every Indian in Malawi was rich, he felt that every Indian in India must be rich. That's the projection that it happens. You see, the moment your diaspora is doing well, your diaspora is nationalistic, etc., the message goes home very, very clearly. Digital India, you spoke about. Everyone who's coming to India these days is remarking on this, on the metro in Delhi, on the cost of mobile, on the cost of data, and the manner that, as you said, you can pay 5 rupees or 10 rupees to buy a thing through UPI. This is something which is being spoken of everywhere. None of the advanced countries, highly advanced countries, are anywhere near us on these various issues. One can carry on and on. Only one issue which I would strongly emphasize here is one of the things which China achieved as a result of its racing economy in the late 90s, in the early part of the millennium, was that 750 million people got lifted out of poverty. Now, that is something which we need to look at. We need to look at the statistics of that. We need to achieve that kind of growth, focus to pick people out of poverty. That will make a huge difference to the nation. I will request you at the later part, maybe you may just like to comment on the inevitability, the question which I have raised with you, inevitability of war. Is India's success story likely to lead it to confrontation with its neighbors, which is bigger and major neighbors? This is something which I'll come back to you and we can have a short discussion on this here. I now hand over to our next panelist, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, and I'm sure we have a lot to hear from him, particularly on the aspect of the Middle East. That's his speciality, on the United States, where he's been also. We'd love to hear all that from you. Thank you.
Thank you, General Hussain, and thank you, Kasa, for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. Of course, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh and Colonel Sharma have already spoken on many of the things. But let me try to just go, because perception will matter when the situation in the world warrants it also. And this is warranting at the moment. So let's see how the world is faring at the moment and how we are going to wade through or navigate these challenges. The COVID pandemic and the unnecessary wars and conflicts, especially when global economy has taken a big hit, the most developed countries, let alone the others, have failed to grasp the intensity of the pandemic and their cumulative inadequacies, I would say, to deal with it and have obviously failed to confront these challenges. They have exposed themselves. Myopic and selfish approaches have been advanced as some sort of panacea, but situation continues to worsen. At the same time, while the developed world was resorting to protectionism, especially for medicines and vaccines during the pandemic, India not only catered to her own requirements by developing her own vaccines and manufacturing for other international players and emerged as a Sanjeevani provider to the world. Her vaccine diplomacy has become a global and gold standard for a mostly selfish world. And that is where one of the key things about India lies. We have heard about digital heft of India. India has emerged as a knowledge power. It is reckoned across the world. We may not have used it to our own advantage as of now, but we have adequate, sufficient heft in this regard, and also a reserve and the reservoir of the youth dividend that will have, being the largest democracy and the largest population in the world, and the biggest youth dividend, which will have its challenges, which have been mentioned by the previous two speakers. So currently, I'm witnessing about 10 trends, which I'll just briefly mention, and which are can be termed as 10 Ds. There is a dissonance in the international discourse. There's discord, there's disruption, division, distrust, dehyphenation, decoupling, destruction, and if you add to it the de-dollarization and disorder across geographies during this transitional global order. And what we are witnessing is that the world is emerging and or probably drifting towards a Cold War 2.0 kind of scenario, post-Russia-Ukraine war, whichever way it takes a turn. Now that will create a major challenge for India. And these two black swan events, even though the COVID pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war have created a lot of difficulties for the world. But if you look at it, there has been some positive dimension to it. I mentioned about the vaccine method as far as the pandemic was concerned. It brought India on a very different pedestal. As far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned, India took a principled stand and stood by it, irrespective of the connotations that we were dependent on Russia or we had a great friendship and all that. But the fact that despite the tremendous international pressure from the Western countries, India has stuck to it. And it was at the SCO also, again, Dr. Jaishankar mentioned the same. So what we are looking at today is that India stands for principles and for the soft power. Now, in order to exercise that soft power, what you need essentially is a hard power and a very strong economy. Now, the economic growth cannot be a given under the circumstances. When we are looking in a unifocal manner and think that perhaps India is growing and will continue to grow, we will need to understand that we are looking to be a part of the global value supply chains, that we are still so very dependent on China, for example. While we were trying to deal with them, our trade went the highest with China. And when we call ourselves the pharmacy of the world, 70-80% of your APIs, you're dependent. Until and unless you have that kind of thing, you cannot think that the economy can be a continuous given and you will continue to rise at the rate of 6.5. I wish we would. Same thing applies to DBI, doing business with India. I always tell people, I said that look, 63rd or 53rd rank, whatever we have got, we have improved a great deal. Our ratings may have gone up. When the ratings go down, we start criticizing them, saying that they are using their own standards. We need to be objective. That is very important. So when I say that 53, that we are 53rd rank or 63rd rank, I must not forget that there are 62 countries or 52 countries above us. And the FDI goes where it is easier. A lot of countries from China are wanting to go out. I met the Taiwanese ambassador the other day, their director general, and he told me that it's impossible to get and work in India. We would like our companies to come here. So we will need to work on those. So economic reform, this government has done an amazing job. In last 30 years, we have done extremely well, but there is much more needs to be done if we want to become an economic power. As far as military is concerned, I think that there we are on the right track. And you are the military people, so you know very well. But I know that military diplomacy, which General Hassan talked about, actually is today the need of the hour. with your soft power projection, because India is looking to defend itself, not to acquire any or give a fitting reply to anyone, but it is looking essentially to go forward. And who's going to be our biggest challenge? Our biggest challenge in the region and outside, I always maintain, whether it is West Asia, whether anywhere else, is going to be China. China's essential objective is, firstly, it does not consider you equal. While we consider China as our equal, China does not consider India as an equal, either culturally, civilizationally, economically, or otherwise. And they know it. But at the same time, the dichotomy and the paradox is that China is only scared of India, and that is a fact. The reason is they never thought that we will stand eyeball to eyeball with them, and internationally we will continue to tell China. At the same time, they also see India's for their own benefit. I always say that China is not the only challenge. Your challenge is also going to be USA and Russia. They are the big powers. So when in this domain, you may have large number of friends, you may have minilaterals, multilaterals, you may be part of the whatever groups, and you want to be on the horseshoe table in the United Nations Security Council, but you are going to challenge it. As General Hassan says, as you go on the trajectory, as you go up the ladder, there will be much greater challenges that will come to us. What we lack essentially, in my opinion, and I've been often talking about is this, and rest of the things I don't want to repeat for shortage of time. One is that we don't have any communication strategy. Gray zone warfare exists. It has existed. And today, India is doing well in G20. How we eventually perform will actually, that one communique will decide how well you have done it. We will see that. But at the same time, what I find is that we would need to continue with this thing, because nothing projects like power. I have seen it in Bangladesh and elsewhere, and I don't want to quote it here, but it is a process. Projection of power is also a process. And power of people, principles, potential, wealth and performance and progress have their own logic in the international discourse. And I think that we need to do that. But I would close by saying that we need to create narratives. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. We need to have a robust, resilient, real-time, responsive strategy, communication strategy, in which our diplomatic missions, our diaspora, our defense, our digital dividend, our deep dimension of soft power, HADR, vaccine diplomacy, voice of global south, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, will play a very great role. So, and lastly, I would say in our discourse, which Dr. Jaishankar has really mastered, I must say, is that very often we are unable to clearly articulate what do we want and what do we stand for. So that is extremely important for us. Lastly, I would say that the underbelly is always vulnerable. So until and unless it has been mentioned by everybody, the domestic compulsions, and in Middle East, we have failed always to encash on our Islamic card. We have not taken a regional or a sub-regional approach. It's I to you to just begun. That is very important in the region. When you talk to the Middle Eastern people, they say, we don't know what India wants. We want India, but what India wants, we don't know. So we have to give up hesitations of history. And if power speaks and acts, and we must imbibe these traits to compete internationally. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Anand Raghunath. That was an excellent discourse, absolutely, and covered a lot of ground. I'm seeing that we don't have any questions which have really come up to us directly yet. So I will place a few questions to you while maybe the audience is still mulling and perhaps looking at typing out some questions in the chat box. I've got a question for Ambassador Gurjeet. In particular, two questions, in fact, which I request you to kindly respond to. One is that you spoke a lot on perception and perception management. Is there a need, is there a time which has come where we need to formally undertake this as a project? You know, when we went in the army, when we go into counterinsurgency, counterterrorism areas, etc., one of the most important tracks on which we follow along with the kinetic track is always perception management, the communication strategy which was spoken of by Ambassador Anant Raghunathan. Do you think we lack a sense of communication strategy? Do you think we have got it all with us, but we fail to somehow cash upon it? Do you think a time has come when we need to actually create some kind of an authority, a communication strategy authority, which bears a stamp, which will undertake this on the part of the nation? There are countries which have got this kind of a thing. Do you think a similar thing should be done in India? And my second question to you, do you think India's diplomatic corps is sufficiently strong enough to undertake its responsibilities today? A lot is being spoken about this. There's a need to expand it. People are not understanding why the Foreign Service is not expanding itself. They need many more people. You can see at one time yesterday how many events were happening which needed international attention. And I'm sure it must be one of the most overworked government communities today, the diplomatic corps. So is there a time when we should be looking for lateral entry and things like that? How exactly can you get this act together? These two questions for you, sir.
Thank you. So, the world has changed extremely rapidly. So when you ask about perception management, there is a public diplomacy division within the MEA, which is the strategy builder for how to manage your perceptions overseas. And since the advent of social media, this has become more complex in the sense that earlier you could give your narrative, and unless somebody came to India or read deeply, the counter narrative was not easy. But in the age of the internet and then the social media, the counter narratives are available. So no more can an ambassador be a good man lying for the good of his country, because the lie will be exposed very quickly. So you need a much stronger narrative. Secondly, on this issue, your narrative can never be better than the reality. In the old days, you could build castles in the air. Now you can't, because people know whether your castle is standing on rock or is built on sand from the sheer volume of information available. So the job of a public diplomacy embassy is very critical. Much of our resources today are devoted to dealing with the diaspora, which earlier were perhaps ignoring the diaspora, but dealing more with the country. But the diaspora today has much greater clout back home. So therefore, their demands are more. Earlier, you faced this in a few countries. Now you face it everywhere. So the question arises, are you to evacuate every diaspora every time there is a crisis? Why don't they leave when an advisory is given? Why don't they listen? Why do they only demand? Now, this is the problem. Now, if your embassy is busy, and please remember, embassies are small. If they are busy with this, where is the time to do your public perception? But I can tell you that the ITEC program, $1 billion program, is one of the most successful programs run by any country in the Deep South. It is an amazing program. All of us who have worked in developing countries have benefited tremendously from sending all kinds of people to India to see how India works. I remember once we had a program when I was Additional Secretary Africa, where we invited first-time MPs in Africa to India. And they all said, you guys are very smart. You're letting the Chinese build our parliament where you are building our minds. So why that program died, I have no idea. I tried to find out while writing my book. I could not come up with an answer. Why did that program die? It was there. Now, you ask the second question, are we too small? Yes, but in the past, a small diplomatic corps of India performed admirably given trying circumstances. But today, the demands are much more, the flow of information is much more. As I told you already, the demands from diaspora are more. You are far too small. Yes, we need to expand. I know that the numbers of people in our days was 20, now is 40. But when you recruit 40, you have to go up the line to do cadre reviews. We amend one part of the chain and don't amend the rest. So everybody gets frustrated by the time they are the director. So this chain doesn't work. We have opened 18 new embassies in Africa, some in what do you call these? The Estonia, Lithuania, the Baltics, and some in Latin America. But do we have the manpower to slot them? I see many of these embassies are still headless because you can't find people to go there. So the demands on our diplomacy have increased rapidly. Our expansion is growing, but it is far slower. We need to work closely on a whole of government approach. I mean, more with defense, more with commerce, more with finance, and this should be working at headquarters. It does not mean that you have to necessarily post all lateral entrants overseas. You need to strengthen headquarters because embassies work. They don't get headquarters support adequately. That is where you need your expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very good. Maybe at a later date, sometime, this whole aspect of diplomacy perhaps needs to be discussed as a webinar by itself, because there are lots and lots of issues which you have really thrown up. The whole aspect of cadre management, for example. I mean, after all, the armed forces have a full cadre, which has a wastage at different stages of life, career, whatever it is. And yet, the compulsion of it being there, we have to ensure it. So there are of course arguments and counter arguments on this which can carry on. But thank you for giving us a full explanation of this aspect. And today we are aware that there is a lot of a lateral entry taking place, a lot of people who are working in the MEA, etc. But there is scope for much more. On the communication strategy aspect, you also mentioned this whole challenge of social media, which is such an important thing today. I have always been an exponent of a formalized system. It's not just only in the MEA, but a formalized system for the government of India, as you say, the whole of government approach. You require perception management in the whole of government. And for that, perhaps the time has come for us to look at some kind of a formal structure. I don't know how exactly it can be. It can be like an authority, all kinds of authorities that we have got. The UPSC, the NDMA and things like that. It could be an authority which will be attached to the ABA or the MHA or anyone of them like that. That will probably manage India's perception. Let me come to Colonel Ashwini. I think the question which I had put perhaps got warded off somehow or the other in your intervention. My question particularly is India's rise likely to be contested? Is it likely to be contested? And of course, we know who's going to contest it. It is China essentially who will contest it. We'll look for all kinds of means by which it will contest it. And the sub-question, the follow-up on that, is there an inevitability of war with China? Should we are preparing ourselves for the eventuality of that. But in your perception, how do you feel, in what time frame? We are looking at, say, 2035, when China is looking at itself, viewing itself, the end of the Xi Jinping period, perhaps. That's what it imagines and perceives for itself by the time Xi Jinping is 82 years old. And that is the time when China wishes to be one of the most powerful nations of the world, to be able to contest and defeat any nation which goes against the interests of China. So are we going to get stuck in that cycle? Do you think? How do your arguments flow on this particular aspect?
Sir, I'll begin with saying that actually you are the right person to answer this question. Anyways, the thing is that two adversaries or two competitors, in a way, are always at war. You are always maneuvering. You're always trying to outmaneuver the opponent. So this is a constant battle. What form does it require at what stage is really the question. And in this age of gray zone warfare, our contest with China is ongoing as it is with a couple of other inimical powers that be. And now we've been having these very low-level clashes at the line of actual control with China for past few years. It's been going on and on, sir. But 2017 onwards, I said, when Doklam happened, and which was a kind of a wake-up call for us, they become more frequent, and which led to Galwan ultimately. That is what led to this eyeball-to-eyeball contact, and for a fairly long time. My question is that China could have. There is a definite military capability differential. I have no hesitation in admitting that China is stronger as on date. But why did it not resort to any violence beyond a point, sir? Why did it always checked itself? It's been doing it for a long time. My own guess is China feels the time is not right. They do not want to engage with India in a kinetic battle. They want to continue with this gray zone warfare till as long as it lasts and till as long as they can manage it. Other than that, of course, China is preparing hard. They have a very strong military, and they're getting stronger. And now that they're getting into space, they're getting into space at a speed much faster than even the US. Russia, on the other hand, is dwindling. So our allies, our bilateral allies, our multinational allies, I mean, we are also playing our own games. But right now, one of our key allies, Russia, is its power is waning. In any case, it is not able to support us militarily. It's a bit of an emergency for us at this stage, because 70 to 80% of our current equipment comes from Russia or from Eastern Europe, and none of them is able to actually service our requirements. Yet, there's not been any war, and I don't think in the near future, sir, there will be a direct conflict. One of the reasons is $136 billion worth of trade between the two countries, and it's increasing. Secondly, China's aim, I don't think, is really India. It just wants to keep India under check, as many other Western countries too. They just want to keep India under check. So it's not that they want to destroy India, or not that they want to fight with India. In the next few years, therefore, I do not think that there will be a direct conflict between India and China. There will be a certain amount of escalation on the land borders, but it will by and large remain localized. And I hope it does. It could lead to some action in the maritime domain as well, as China has a whole lot of maritime capability which lies untested. And I have reason to believe that every time India and China have these minor conflicts at the line of actual control, the Chinese always come back a little better prepared the next time. They're learning. It's unlike the Indian army, which is battle hardened, which is strong, which can take on China or any other army in a localized conflict. At a larger level, of course, we will have a problem. But a localized conflict, we can match them. But Chinese learn fast, I must say. The same situation exists in the maritime domain. They have a lot of warships, submarines, and a lot of weapons on board, but they're not being tried and tested. There may be a situation where they actually have a localized conflict, and which adversary is really the best for them at this point in time is India, because we will respond, and yet it can be localized, it can be contained. So I won't be surprised if that kind of a limited conflict does take place. A full-fledged war is not in China's interest, so they will stay away from it, they will resist. If they must, then I think 2030 or give or take 2 years, a couple of years, that seems like a good window, because that's the time when India's Atmanirbharta would be bearing results and we would be increasing our capacity exponentially. That's the time when China would have reached, by and large, reached its peak, and would be a good time for them to, it's a good option for them to go to war if they must. Having said that, I would say India too remains a strong military. We can take care of ourselves, but we must continue to build up our and reduce this military capability differential that exists as on date.
Thank you, Karan Sharma. Thank you very much. I think you were spot on virtually in your entire response. And I too tend to agree with you that war is not an inevitability on the horizon anywhere. And what China is attempting to do is to coerce you and will continue using that coercion to try and dictate to you, get your perceptions changed, your thoughts and ideas on international security changed, and things like that. But inevitability of war seems to be quite remote. Especially the winnability factor of conflict and war today as a part of conventional war has become a very, very questionable thing, and particularly after the Ukraine war, which is ongoing. We've got some interesting questions from Mr. Pradeep Shukla here in the chat box, and I'm going to use some of them have been answered already. Ambassador Gurjeet has already answered the question on perception management, I think in fair depth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Ambassador Anil Trigunath, particularly this pointed question of what is happening on the Ashley Tellis statements which have been made of late, that India is not going to be a reliable partner. India is not a reliable partner for the United States when it comes to a contest between looking at China and looking at the United States. India will inevitably favor China for whatever reason he has felt. Perhaps we'd like to hear your views on this. But how is this likely to affect Indo-US relations in the future? Because you must remember that India's future greatness, India's developing greatness is very largely dependent on the management of its relationship with the only superpower of the world, the United States of America. And if there is a trust deficit at this stage, then obviously not much can be expected beyond. So this is one aspect. The second question, which is also, I'm taking it out from Mr. Pradeep Shukla's various statements, is that is a military, should India at this stage start looking at military alignments? For example, AUKUS. Obviously, AUKUS came about because Quad was not military enough. It was not a military, it's not a military multilateral at all. Should India give its indications now that it is willing to step across the Rubicon and perhaps consider military alignments in the future? We have been in a quasi mode, exercise Malabar, carrying out Yuddha Abhyas with the United States and things like that, but haven't gone whole hog yet. Your perception, please.
Well, you understand it is, there are 2 or 3 things that we need to probably remember. One thing is that I realize, and I always state that none of the superpowers, whether it is USA, whether it is China, or whether it is Russia, have been able to win a single war in the 20th and 21st century. They have all been defeated, rather, and ignominiously exited. That is, we have to yet to see what happens to this. Secondly, as far as the USA and India relationship is concerned, I mean, it is a complex relationship. There's no doubt that in the deep state in the United States, there is a realization, and Ashley Tellis has reflected that in a certain sense. He was, until recently, was going gung-ho over India, if you come to think of it. He has been talking a great deal about India's rise and this and that. But the problem with the American establishment is that they only think from an alliance mindset. If you're not with me, you're with the enemy. That is the kind of thing. But today, in a situation where India and China are also adversaries, USA, its policies are itself do not give a great confidence to India that it will stand with you in the case of a conflict between India and China, except some statements. And if you remember in my beginning, I said that we have to be careful with China, with USA, with Russia, all three, as far as our own defense and our own rise is concerned. So I don't see that India is going to have a military alliance with the NATO. NATO has invited us to be a partner or whatever it is we have seen. You know, in Hindi, sometimes people say that, and this is general perception of the public also, कि अगर आपका यूएसए दोस्त है तो आपको दुश्मनों की जरूरत नहीं है. I mean, we cannot forget, like, so I see how I see India's rise, sir. I see that, and Ambassador Gurjeet Singh also referred to that more and more countries are moving towards strategic autonomy of some sort or the other. And this time, a very large number of countries who are comparatively well off, let us say in West Asia, they are all looking to have this kind of a platform, this kind of a grouping. So I see that India once again has a possibility of leading the nations for strategic autonomy because of the principled stand. And that is very important. We have all the good things going for us. We are going to be one of the biggest markets. So wherever, like, Russians are not doing us a great favor, it is a great market for them for the defense, nuclear and other things. Of course, they have provided us a lot of comfort level in the UN Security Council and others. The Americans today, what they do, if you're buying anything from the USA for $1, you must buy $2 thing from it. The relationship is totally transactional. But democracy in the name, just when it comes to talking. Otherwise, from where are you getting the maximum criticism today? Just because we did not condemn Russia in this war. We did not condemn the Americans at the time. We have our own policy. We have our strategic autonomy. We have choices. We are standing for peace. And that's where it takes us. So I think that there is, I don't see any sort of a military alliance, but quasi alliances like under the Quad or AUKUS, some kind of arrangements. Even maybe doing some kind of exercises with the NATO. We are already participating in a large number of exercises, as you already know. So I think those are going to continue, and we will continue to enhance our defense capabilities. But the biggest lag that we have today, and we'll have to bridge that gap apart from economic, is the technology gap. And that is what is going to be, is very important for us to continue to work with the Americans. Although I must say, and most of you who have discussed with the Americans know that they barely transfer anything.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And actually, you have answered a question which was there in the chat box for you from Shami Raj. I think you have more or less covered this whole aspect of strategic autonomy and emphasized on it that at any stage, India cannot afford to lose its strategic autonomy. In fact, strategic autonomy is something which most international players are today harping upon. So that has been answered. Let me come to Ambassador Gurjeet on a question from General Rajan Kochar, which has just appeared on the chat box. If I may read it out to you, and then maybe I can just contextualize it. Of late, we have seen Chinese overtures to soften its stand to resume dialogue and trade with India, keeping the boundary dispute in the background. Will India change its present stance? I would say, should we change our present stance? That should be the question which actually I would like to put to you. Should we change our present stance? In the last 10 days, we have seen both the Raksha Mantri on the 27th of April in the bilateral made it very clear when he did his Namaste and no handshake. He made it very clear that resumption of normalcy is contingent upon resumption of normalcy at the LAC. First, let's go back to status quo ante April 2020, and I would say actually 2013, even in Depsang. Go back to 2013, but at least 2020, if nothing else. Is India likely to change, or should it change its stance at all? Your views on this.
Thank you. First, if you see what happened at SCO, you see that India is holding bilaterals with Chinese counterparts, but not with Pakistani counterparts. So there is a katti with Pakistan, but not with China. Second point, China expects everybody to kowtow to it, irrespective of what it does. Look at the ASEAN countries whose islands and shoals it has occupied, it has an engagement with them, political, economic, military. None of them do katti to China. So they expect us to react the same way. So as an Indian, I believe that my government's current stance is correct. And we should talk to them, but with the intention to go back to what you said, the status quo ante. As an analyst, this is where the question comes, should. I think we need to be clear that the power differential between India and China is not a perception, it is real. The size of their economy is 7 times ours. You can do all the katti you want and your trade with them is growing larger and larger, as it is for the other Quad countries. We are not the only one. All 4 Quad countries, I have written about this, all have expanded trade with China and suffering deep deficits, including India. So there are certain supply chains on which we are dependent on China. How do we get out of them? Because that is going to impact your development. Are we ready today to tighten our belt and kick them out of the frontier that they have infiltrated into? So this is a question I left to Colonel Sharma, but he did not grasp this. I want to know from the army, are you ready to kick them out if given the order? Now, if you can't, or the orders are not coming, then I think the power differential should be respected. And you decide what level of engagement you want. You can continue with this government to government, little engagement, private sector, plenty of engagement. That is what. But let's be clear, I think Anil has also said this. China will not let you rise in this world. They feel threatened by you. They don't feel threatened by ASEAN. So either you do away with that threat and say we are no threat to you, but that also we can't say. Our sheer size, our sheer potential is a threat to them. So for 20 years, you manage this relationship. Today, we are in a transition of a new management. Will it be to our disadvantage or can we seek advantage from it? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll come down to Colonel Ashwini Sharma since Ambassador Gurjeet was cornering him on this issue. But let me bat for him for a while. I think he stated it quite clearly. He stated very clearly that there is a huge capability differential between India and China, understood and recognized by all of us. The question is that he also answered the question on inevitability of war. He said it's not an inevitable thing. This will be coercion. There will be attempts to try and change your perceptions and things like that. My only question to him is, should it come down to brass tacks? Should it come down to open confrontation across the line of actual control, more than one area, Ladakh, Arunachal, everywhere, here and there? What is the confidence with which the Indian Armed Forces can say that they can take this engagement to a logical conclusion of victory in battle? Would you like to stick your neck out on this, Ashwini?
That's a difficult question to answer, really, sir. Some of us also know some of the answers, and as you said, I mean, I did say in the beginning that there's definitely a substantial military power differential that exists. We are trying to close the gap, but such things cannot happen overnight. And that's why I said 2030 is the time when Atmanirbhar will start showing results, when we will be getting stronger, and that may be an opportune time or an option for China to, set us back. Other than that, I mean, like I also said that you're always at war with your adversary. You don't have to say whether you're friends or your adversary. The point is there are two neighbors which have the definite pie. Both the neighbors are looking at greater influence. And then there are these bilateral and multilateral relationships that you have. Like I said, I don't think China is really keen on fighting with us, not in the near future. But somebody else maybe, because that just might suit them for these two countries, that is China and India, to have war and kill each other, and somebody else has the last laugh. I mean, you got to watch out for that eventuality and be smart. Your specific question, sir, if there's actually a conflict tomorrow, well, technologically, China is superior. Battle hardened, I think Indian Army is superior. Local conflicts, Indian Army will definitely take them on. When it comes to things like cyber and space, I'm not so sure because there's a definite differential. But a limited land border conflict supported by the air forces of the two countries, I think we also have a number of advantages, which I won't go into technical details in this particular forum, but we have advantages. We will definitely give them a bloody nose. I'll leave it there.
I will endorse every word you have spoken, and I will say that no one can perceive in today's environment that India is a pushover or that the Indian armed forces are a pushover. Right? Whatever state we are in today, equipment, manpower, training, capability, anything, there isn't a better fighter on the Himalayan front than a member of the Indian Armed Forces, Indian Armed Forces altogether. And I don't think the Chinese would ever look at general war. It will, as you very correctly said, local wars. If it's looking at local wars, I don't think China has the capability to take it to a conclusion as far as India is concerned. Okay, that's as far as putting our necks out is concerned and making sure that we answer those difficult questions. My last question, because we are coming to the end, we are already at 6:30. My last question to Ambassador Trigunath. And actually, there's a question which has come here, and I'll put two questions, or maybe I'll put the other question to Ambassador Gurjeet. In this question, this has already been answered by Ambassador Gurjeet Singh to an extent. It's on information warfare and on perception management. That the Chinese and the Pakistanis are seen to be much more conversant with the whole business of information warfare, perception management, information warfare, communication strategy, etc. We have seen the Global Times. They've got a structured system in China. You've seen the ISPR in Pakistan put together. They get their heads together on this whole issue, and we are subjected to it all the time. Do you think, Ambassador Gurjeet has already given his perception on it? I'll request to Ambassador Anil to give his perception. Do you think we need to do much more on this? Is China and Pakistan being better at it? Do we need to close the capability gap in this domain, which isn't really a domain of war fighting? What important steps do we need to take as far as media management is concerned and the whole domain of information warfare?
Yes, sir. Actually, if you remember, I've just I closed my speech by saying that the first intervention that we lack a robust, resilient communication strategy. We don't have it. So narratives can only be built when you know what exactly you want to convey. Right now, everything that our Prime Minister says or the Foreign Minister says becomes the news. But then there is much more to it if there is an India story that needs to be conveyed. In addition, we would need a significant capacity to be able to monitor the trends, what is happening right now. That is being done for intelligence purposes, but that should be done basically to create a proactive countering of these and exposing them. As far as China is concerned, we know that it started in 60s, actually, not even now, and they continue to do so. Look at this small thing incident about China. They refused to give visa to an Arunachal delegation many years ago. They say you don't need a visa. And then you can travel because you are part of China. You know, this created such a major issue for us. Naturally, it is impinging on your sovereignty, but at the same time, how smartly they have rattled you. And India is a democracy. So everybody comes to think of it, it becomes a very big news. I fully agree with Colonel Sharma and with yourself that China does not want a war with India right now. For the simple reason that it is looking to displace United States within a few years' time. any war, whether in Taiwan or on our front, is going to take it back by 20 years and India by 20 years. Neither India wants a war, nor China wants a war. So that is very much so. As far as Pakistan is concerned, let me just narrate to you a story. When I was posted in New York, Chinese, through their drug money, were able to hire 4 PR firms to talk on Kashmir all the time. 4 PR firms. We did not even have a single one. And the one that we eventually hired after much alabalu, they did not know how to use them, what to convey, how to counter it. So we definitely, I mean, I have no hesitation in saying we are all part of, we must take blame of all for this, for not having a robust strategy. It is very important. How it can be done? You have seen in the Russia-Ukraine war, 99% narrative which is coming is from the English media, which is picked up by the Americans and everybody else, peddling in India, and they are conveying it. Russians have miserably failed in conveying their side of the story. So I think that it is very important in war, before war, all the time, we can win a war without fighting it also. So that is something very important. I think we need to have, and there has to be a comprehensive national strategy. And as you mentioned, that perhaps an authority. I always say, like even in India, for example, there are 40, 50 diplomats and army officers who are on the TV channels all the time, including us. But we don't have the real news, what the government is thinking. So till we know that, there is no harm in the government creating some kind of a forum where once a month they invite these 40, 50 people who are patriotic and tell them that what is the line of thinking, so that we are not countering each other and just trying to create a false narrative or falling flat on it. So I think these are things. And then, of course, this is social media management is another very important dimension that we need to work on it. Chinese have mastered this art. And they do it, and Pakistanis no longer have that kind of an heft, I must say, which they used to have at one time. They are suffering tremendously. But if you see, let me just tell you now, yesterday's interview, those of everybody who has watched this foreign minister, the only thing that, he told white lies with such ease, without getting rattled even once by a single question. And that's what is, I think that's his strength, that he goes and talks to all the people, like let's say another 6 or 7 members of the SEO. He'll say, look, India. Now, those are the kind of things that are happening. So we need to double up actually what we are going to do, rather than people feeling that we have become arrogant or we have been this time. So I think those are all issues require a much more analysis at our own front.
Thank you. I think you covered it rather well. In fact, I tend to agree with you on most of it. And yesterday's Bilawal Bhutto's interview with Rajdeep Sardesai, frankly saying, I was quite surprised. I did not expect. I mean, the perception created in my mind was that this chap is a dimwit. He knows nothing, and the only thing he knows is how to abuse the neighboring prime minister, and he's an intern foreign minister under his own deputy, who used to be the foreign minister before. But he came out fairly well. And his choice of words and this and that were fairly good. So Pakistan's perception management and through these kind of things sometimes does work to its favor. But we'll leave it at that. We will not go further into it because we're running out of time now. But I think we've had a fantastic discussion here. There are more questions coming in, but coming in rather late at this time, so we may not be able to take them on. But I think we've had a very good discussion here, and it's come out crystal clear that India is on the rise. We need an all-of-government approach to make sure this is not going to be a few departments, diplomacy and the military and things like that, who are just involved in India's rise. This is the whole of government which has to contribute towards it. There are going to be obstacles to that rise in different domains, not just in the military domain or the diplomatic or the geopolitical domain. There will be different domains. And one of the very major things required here is that we've got the means, we've got soft power, we've got military capability, etc. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our projection is correct. Our perception management is correct. We read the situations which are being painted in front of us correctly and make sure that we convey our messaging also equally correctly. more on the subject, we can extract some aspects of the subject itself for future webinars of CASA. But at the moment here, all I need to do is to thank my fellow panelists. They've been outstanding, absolutely, in their interventions. And now I hand over to General Dipinder Singh for the closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, General Atta. We have had an extremely fascinating discussion and a very perceptive question and answer session. I'm sure all of us are going home this evening much wiser and with a lot to contemplate on. But all that remains for me to do is to thank Ambassador Gurjeet, Colonel Sharma, Ambassador Tigunayat, General Atta, our Founder Director General Gautam Murthy, our Technical Assistant Ms. Bernali, and above all the participants who watched this very, very interesting webinar. Thank you so very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Thank you.